My name is Karen, and I'm 28 years old. Most people would say I have a picture-perfect life. I live in a cozy little apartment in the city, have a stable marketing job, a golden retriever named Bruno, and enough houseplants to start a jungle. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: appearances lie, and mine's been lying for a long time. It all began the day I got a call from my mother. "Karen, your father's not well. I think you should come home for a while." Her voice cracked in a way I hadn't heard in years, soft, unsure, not the sharp, commanding woman I grew up with. Something was different. I hadn't been back home in nearly 6 years. Not for holidays. Not for birthdays. Not even when I heard from a neighbor that my father had been hospitalized last winter. The truth was, I didn't have the kind of family you run back to. But that call, something about the way she said it, like she needed me, pulled me back. When I arrived at our family house, nothing had changed. The same ivy crawling up the bricks. The same creaky wind chime swinging by the porch. Even the way the door stuck halfway open felt like a memory frozen in time. But the moment I stepped inside, I felt it, the tension, thick, unspoken, lingering in the air like stale perfume. "Karen," my mother said with surprise, as if she hadn't expected me to actually show up. Her arms were open, but her eyes darted nervously behind me. I followed her gaze and saw her, Emily, my younger sister. Perfect Emily, the golden child. The one who could do no wrong. The one who never had to ask twice for affection. The one who broke my trust years ago, in ways she never acknowledged. "Hey, Karen," Emily said flatly. Not a hug, not a smile. Just the kind of greeting you'd give someone you once knew but didn't care to know again. I said nothing. Just nodded. The first few days were quiet. My dad was resting most of the time. He'd had a mild stroke, they told me, and needed physical therapy. I stayed mostly in my childhood room, the walls still painted in faded lavender. My old books were untouched. Even the tiny drawing of a sunflower I'd made when I was 10 still hung above the headboard. It was strange how time hadn't moved here, except in our relationships. The house was full of silence, but not the peaceful kind. The type that holds secrets in its corners and dares you to speak them. One evening, while making tea in the kitchen, I overheard Emily talking to our mom in the living room. "She's only here for attention," Emily whispered. "You know how she is. She always finds a way to make things about her." I froze. My hand tightened around the cup. Mom didn't disagree. She just sighed. "Don't start, Em. Not now." That stung more than if she had agreed. I wanted to scream. To confront them both. To ask what I had ever done to deserve being treated like a shadow in my own family. But instead, I swallowed the tea and the pain, and went upstairs. It was the 4th night when things started unraveling. I was walking past the study when I saw the light on. Dad was inside, sitting up, flipping through an old album. I hesitated, but stepped in. He looked up and smiled weakly. "Come sit," he said. His voice was softer than I remembered. We sat there, turning pages, revisiting birthdays, holidays, vacations I barely remembered. "Your mother and I were proud of you, you know," he said suddenly. I looked at him, startled. "Then why didn't you say it?" I asked. He didn't answer for a long moment. Then, he whispered, "Because I wasn't allowed to." "Allowed," I repeated. "Karen, .. There are things you don't know." Before I could press him, we heard footsteps. Emily peeked into the room. "Oh, you're up. You shouldn't be pushing yourself, Dad," she said, walking in like she owned the place. Dad immediately closed the album. I left. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. Something about what Dad had said wouldn't let me rest. So I went back into the study, hoping to find the album he was looking through. I found it tucked under a stack of old documents. But there was something else too. A sealed envelope. My name was written on it in Dad's handwriting. I stared at it for a moment before opening it. Inside was a letter. A long one. A confession, really. In that letter, my father told me everything. That when I was 12, I had won a scholarship to an elite art school. But my mother had declined it on my behalf, saying it would break the family apart. That I would forget my roots. I never knew. I just thought I hadn't been accepted. That when I applied for a summer internship in New York during college, and mysteriously never heard back, it was because someone had called the company, told them I was unstable. That someone was my mother. That Dad had wanted to tell me the truth for years. But every time he tried, Mom convinced him it would only bring chaos. And the worst part, Emily knew. She was there for the conversations. She'd stood by and said nothing. My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe. I felt my knees give in and sank onto the floor. The pieces of my life, every unexplained failure, every missed opportunity, every moment of doubt, they weren't mine. They were designed. I stayed up all night, reading and rereading that letter. By morning, something inside me had changed. I no longer wanted answers. I wanted resolution, so when breakfast was served, I came downstairs and sat across from Emily and Mom like everything was normal. But there was something in my eyes that wasn't there before. "How's Dad?" I asked casually. "Still resting," Mom replied, sipping her tea. I smiled. "I read the letter," I said. Silence. Emily stiffened. Mom froze. "I know everything." Mom was the first to speak. "Karen, whatever you think." "No," I cut her off. "This time, you don't get to twist the story." Emily tried to laugh it off. "You always overreact. It's probably something Dad wrote years ago. It was dated 3 months ago," I said flatly. "Right before the stroke." Mom's eyes darkened. "He's old, confused, convenient," I replied. There was so much I wanted to say, to scream, to demand apologies, to drag the truth out into the light. But I didn't. I just stood up, looked at both of them, and said, "You've taken enough from me. Not anymore." And I walked away. Back in my room, I called my old professor, the one who had encouraged me to apply to that art school. He still remembered me. Said he'd been waiting years to hear from me again. "I'm ready now," I told him, and for the first time in years, I actually meant it. That was the day I stopped surviving and started living. But of course, the storm hadn't even started yet. The next few days passed like a quiet war. No one spoke of the letter. No one admitted anything. But the silence was louder than ever. I spent most of my time in the attic, digging through old boxes, searching not for confrontation, but for clarity. I needed to understand how a family like mine had become so skilled at betrayal without ever raising their voices. That's when I found the tapes, labeled in my dad's handwriting. They were old VHS recordings, some dated back over 20 years. I took the box downstairs, dusted off the ancient player still plugged into the basement TV, and started watching. Birthday parties, school plays, family dinners, and in every frame, I saw it. The pattern. Me, always just out of focus. Singing solo at the school play, but never zoomed in. Blowing out birthday candles while the camera panned to Emily opening her gift. I saw a little girl trying her best to matter, and a family that refused to let her. I didn't cry. I felt hollow, until one tape, dated June 2007, just said, "Dad and Karen, last summer." The screen flickered and came to life. There we were, sitting by the lake behind our old house. I was 16. My father was telling me a story about how he'd once painted a mural in a school he visited in college. I was listening with awe. And then I said something that stopped me cold. "I want to paint too, Dad. Maybe one day I'll show the world what I see." His reply, "You will, Karen, and I'll be your biggest fan." I paused the tape. My breath caught. That wasn't the dad I remembered. That was the man who had been buried under silence and guilt for years. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I painted. For the first time in years, I pulled out my old sketchbooks, set up a canvas, and poured out everything I had kept buried. My anger, my pain, my stolen dreams. By morning, the canvas was full, not just with color, but with truth. Later that day, Dad called for me. He was feeling stronger. "I saw the painting," he said, voice soft. "It's beautiful." I sat beside him. "Why didn't you ever stop her?" I asked. "Why let her take so much from me?" His eyes watered, because I was weak and scared. "I let your mother convince me that protecting you meant controlling you. She didn't protect me. She erased me." "I know," he whispered. "And I'll never forgive myself for that." For the first time, I saw it, regret, raw and real, and that broke something in me. Not in a bad way, in a freeing way. "Then help me," I said. "Help me reclaim what I lost." He nodded. Together. Over the next week, we did what no one expected. We made noise. I applied for a local gallery showcase, using my old portfolio and my new work. I reached out to the professor again, who connected me with a curator. And I found out that one of the pieces I'd drawn years ago, the sunflower one, had won an unofficial award at a student expo. One I was never told about, because Emily submitted her own piece in my place, and one using my work. I confronted her. She denied it at first, of course. She laughed. "You're paranoid." But when I pulled out the gallery brochure, the one that still had my signature faintly visible under her forged one, she stopped laughing. "You weren't going to do anything with it," she said defensively. "You always just sat around dreaming." "I made something of it." "You stole from me," I snapped. "It was one drawing." "No, Emily. It was everything." She rolled her eyes. "You're so dramatic. You're just bitter I did something with my life." "You mean lying and stepping on people? That's not success." She stepped closer, voice colder. "You're just jealous that Mom and Dad loved me more." And there it was, the truth, finally spoken. I didn't reply. I didn't need to, because this time, I had proof, purpose, and peace. I walked away. When the gallery exhibition was announced, my name was on the list. Karen Whitmore, solo debut. My painting, titled Unheard, was chosen as the headliner. A swirl of red and gold and black. It depicted a faceless girl standing under a storm while the world ignored her. The day of the opening, I stood in that gallery, surrounded by strangers admiring my pain, and for the first time in my life, I felt seen. My mother came. Uninvited, she stood by the painting. Arms crossed, lips pursed. "This is what you want. Pity?" she asked coldly. "No," I replied. "Just the truth. You're embarrassing us." "No. I'm finally honoring me." She didn't stay long. Emily never showed. Dad came though. He wore a suit too big for him, leaned on a cane. But his eyes were brighter than ever. "I'm proud of you," he said, tearing up. You already said that once. I smiled. Well, I mean it now. We hugged, not like strangers trying to stitch a broken bond, but like a father and daughter who had finally found their way back. The exhibition was a success. I was invited to do a podcast interview, then another gallery show. Offers started coming in. But more than all of that, I had myself back. One night, months later, I got a message from Emily. A single line. I didn't know you had it in you. I stared at the screen, unsure whether to laugh, cry, or ignore it. In the end, I just deleted it, because this wasn't about her anymore. It was never really about her. It was about the girl with dreams, who kept quiet too long. The one who finally chose to speak, paint, and live out loud. Life didn't magically transform overnight, but something inside me had shifted forever. I was no longer waiting for permission to create, to speak, to belong. I had reclaimed what was mine, not with noise or revenge, but with truth and persistence. But I wasn't naive. Peace in a family like mine didn't last long. About 6 months after the gallery show, I received a formal notice. A property dispute. Apparently, my grandmother's old cottage, a small place near the edge of town, had been willed jointly to Emily and me. Except Emily was now contesting that will, claiming I had manipulated Dad while he was sick, and that I had coerced him into giving me a larger share of the estate. It was absurd, and yet, that's how she operated, quiet sabotage under the mask of legality. I visited the cottage just once after that. It was still the same, ivy climbing up its sides, the front porch creaking with every step, the smell of old wood and lilacs hanging in the air. It wasn't the property I wanted, it was the memory. Grandma May had loved me openly, fiercely. She'd taught me how to braid my hair, how to make perfect tea, and how to trust silence without fearing it. As I stood in the doorway, I remembered one night from my childhood, maybe I was 10, when I'd run away to this very place after Emily had told our entire school bus that I still wet the bed. I sat on the porch, sobbing, until Grandma opened the door, wrapped me in a quilt, and whispered, "Some people fear what they don't understand. That's not your fault, baby." Now, years later, I was back here. But instead of running away, I was ready to defend what mattered. I hired a lawyer, collected every document, and more than that, I shared my story publicly, not out of revenge, but out of strength. In a local interview, I spoke about creativity, family suppression, emotional neglect, and the invisible scars many carry when raised in homes where love is a currency traded for obedience. The response, overwhelming messages flooded in, from strangers, from former classmates, even from one of Emily's ex-boyfriends, who messaged me saying, "I never saw it back then, but now I do. You were always the one with a voice. They just tried to silence it." Emily's legal action was dropped quietly 2 weeks later. I never heard from her again. Dad's health was declining again. Slowly, this time, more hospital visits, more tests. We both knew we were nearing the final chapter. One evening, as I sat beside his bed, sketchbook in hand, he reached for my fingers. "I kept secrets," he said. "And I regret that. I didn't ask which ones. I just waited. I let your mother rewrite your childhood," he said, voice thin. "She hated how much of me she saw in you. That hit me. She hated you." I whispered, double quotes, "No, she loved me too much." And when I started fading emotionally, mentally, she tried to control what was left. That meant controlling you. I felt tears well up. "You were never the weak one," Karen, he said. You were the one who saw too much. That's why they feared you. We didn't speak after that. He closed his eyes and drifted into sleep. He passed away 3 days later. The funeral was quiet, small. Emily didn't show. My mother stood by the casket like a statue. She didn't cry, she didn't speak to me, and I didn't approach her. Some silences are better left untouched. After the funeral, I returned to my apartment and sat in front of a new canvas for hours. Then I painted again. This time, it was Dad, sitting by the lake, telling me about murals and dreams and the world he never fully got to live in. I added a child beside him, me, staring not at him, but beyond him, at a rising sun. The piece was titled, Inheritance. And that, I realized, was what he had truly left me. Not money, not property, not trauma, but the spark, the hunger, the pain-turned purpose that only those who endure silence can understand. That winter, a publishing house contacted me. They wanted me to write a memoir. At first I hesitated. But then I remembered that tape me at 16, saying I wanted to show the world what I saw. So I wrote, not just about family, but about invisibility, about being the quiet one in the room who noticed everything, about how generational trauma wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was the subtle rearranging of dreams to fit someone else's comfort. The book was published under the title, Whispered Wars, and it changed everything. It wasn't a bestseller, but it reached the right people. Girls like me, boys raised to stay small, artists who never got their chance, and parents who realized, too late, that control was not the same as care. I was invited to speak at colleges, art programs, non-profits. I was no longer just painting. I was teaching others how to find their own canvas, and that, to me, was the real revenge. Not lawsuits, not shouting matches, but becoming everything they said I couldn't be without becoming like them. One summer evening, years after the storm had passed, I sat in my quiet studio, surrounded by brushes, books, and a half-finished portrait of a little girl with fierce eyes. She reminded me of me, before the bruises were hidden behind polite smiles and well-behaved silences. The doorbell rang. It startled me, mostly because I wasn't expecting anyone. I peeked through the window and froze. It was Emily. I hadn't seen her in 4 years. She looked thinner, more tired. Her face still wore the same precision, hair tucked, lips lined, blazer sharp, but the arrogance in her eyes had softened into something else. I didn't know what. Not yet. I opened the door, but said nothing. I don't want anything, she said quickly. I read your book. I studied her, unsure what she was here for. Apology, accusation. You were right about me, she said. About a lot of things that I hadn't expected. She hesitated. I kept competing with you for love I already had. I didn't know how to share it. That hit hard. She glanced around, visibly uncomfortable. When Mom left for Paris last year, she didn't tell me either. I found out through her assistant. A long pause. I think we were both daughters she didn't know how to love. I didn't reply. I didn't forgive. But I also didn't shut the door. She looked at the portrait behind me through the window. She looks like you, she whispered. I nodded. She's me, I said. Before we lost her. Emily nodded, understanding more than she let on. She didn't ask to come inside. She just stood there a moment longer and said, I'm sorry I didn't protect you when I could've. And just like that, she turned and walked away. That was the last time I saw her. But somehow, it was enough. Months later, I was sitting across from a young woman named Lila, during one of my mentorship sessions. She had grown up in foster care and was trying to process her trauma through painting. But every brushstroke felt like a scream. "I keep thinking, maybe I'm too broken to make anything beautiful," she said. I took her hand gently. "You're not broken," I told her. "You're just too honest for a world that rewards pretend. Your art isn't meant to impress. It's meant to witness." She started crying, but not in despair. In release. And in that moment, I saw my younger self again, Karen, at 16, terrified and furious, hiding sketchbooks under her bed and letters under floorboards. I smiled. In the years that followed, I didn't chase recognition. I didn't need validation. I traveled, I taught, I loved carefully. I chose friends like I chose colors, not the brightest, but the ones that blended well with my truth. I met someone. His name was Marcus. A quiet architect who believed silence wasn't empty, but full of answers if you listened right. He never asked me to shrink. He let me exist as I was, sharp, soft, grieving, healing. We didn't rush anything. We built slowly, like bricks in a house we both wanted to live in, not just decorate for others. When I told him my story, all of it, he didn't flinch. He just said, "You're not hard to love, Karen. You were just raised by people who were too afraid to love someone they couldn't control." And I cried, not because I was sad, but because for once, someone saw me without needing me to explain myself. We married under a canopy of ivy near the same lake Dad once dreamed about. I wore a simple white dress and walked barefoot on the grass. No family on my side. Just friends, mentors, students, all of whom had seen me rebuild myself from ashes. As I stood there, I felt no bitterness, only gratitude. Because I had become the woman I needed when I was a girl. Now, I paint not just for myself, but for those who were told they were too much, too sensitive, too bold. I teach not from a textbook, but from the wounds I survived and the light I reclaimed. Sometimes, I visit Grandma May's cottage. It's mine now, not just legally, but spiritually. I renovated it into a retreat space for young artists. It's filled with color and music and laughter. Every corner echoes with stories that were once silenced. One day, I found an old box in the attic, dusty, forgotten. Inside were letters Dad had written to me but never sent. Apologies, drawings, memories. Some were unfinished, some messy, some heartbreaking, but one had a simple line that I'll never forget. "I see you, even when others refuse to look." I framed that line and hung it by my bed, because that was the truth. All my life, I had only wanted to be seen. To this day, people still ask why I never exposed more of my family. Why I didn't name and shame. Why I chose peace over punishment. The answer is simple. Because I didn't survive to stay angry. I survived to live, to thrive, to paint every unspoken word onto canvases that now speak louder than screams. Because sometimes the best revenge is becoming someone they never imagined you could be. And that's exactly who I am now. Karen.artist.survivor.voice. Finally, free.